Welcome to The Point, whether you're meeting at 9 o'clock at Hexham Priory School, at 4 o'clock at Hexham Priory School, or whether you're watching in the big old world of the internet. My name is David Flame, I'm the Minister at The Point, and we're delighted to have you with us today. If you're not yet a Christian, then we're particularly glad that you're here, as our church is designed for you. Today we continue our look at the book of Romans, and we'll be looking at what Paul has to say about obeying authorities. When is it right to obey what the authorities say, and when should we rebel? Let's have a look and see what Paul has to say.
Romans 13, 1-3. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. What Paul's saying there is that everybody who's in charge, those who are the government, are there because God has foreordained it, because God has decided who will be in charge. Goes on. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. So, you needn't be afraid of the authorities if you're doing the right thing, is what Paul is saying here.
That's quite an interesting idea for Christians who were subject to persecution, whether from Nero or whether from the local authorities. Lots of Christians suffered, and Paul is saying that whatever the suffering is, you should go through with it. So if you said to him, yes, but Nero is absolutely terrible, how can we obey him? Paul would say, he's the one in authority, you have to obey him, even if it means going to death in the arena. Christians throughout the centuries have wrestled with this issue. Should we rebel against the authorities because the authorities do not always follow the Christian way, or should we obey them and try and get on with our Christian lives anyway? What happens when push comes to shove? Who is in charge?
So Paul continues, for the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. So, you should obey the authorities and do the right thing, not because you're afraid of what might happen, but also because it's the right thing to do. This is very interesting when we consider that Paul is a follower of Jesus, a man who did everything right, and yet whom the authorities punished, even though he didn't deserve it. Paul goes on. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honour, then honour. And for Roman citizens and Jews wondering whether they should pay their taxes to a government which was not always fair and not always right, Paul is saying, yes, you should. You should pay all that you owe, because the authorities are there, because God put them there.
But do we agree? If the government's doing the wrong thing, should we stand up and say that? If the government isn't behaving in a Christian manner, should we complain? Should we make a difference? Should we do what we can do to change the world? Or should we accept that those in authority are there because of God's will? Christians have wrestled with these questions over the centuries, and it's led to some very strange situations where people have decided, well, we're going to say nothing because the rulers are in authority, and that's what they're there for, even if they should kill us. But what do you think? Let's have a look at our questions and see where you would stand and why.
So the first question is, when should we obey the authorities? For Paul, it will be always. And there are Christians who have said it's always right to do what the authorities say, no matter what it is. But is that true? What do you think? When should we obey the authorities and when should we disobey? Number 2, is democracy the right form of government? We're from Britain, the home of democracy, so we think that democracy is right, and yet there are other forms of government. And is democracy what God wants? And what happens if the majority are wrong? And thirdly, should churches be democratic? Some churches are set up whereby there's one leader and they decide. Other churches set up where everything has to be decided by the whole of the people when they vote together. But should churches have that leadership structure? So I'm going to leave you with questions for a while, and then we'll get back together and see what you've said.
Well, that's all we got time for today. Thank you very much for being here. I hope that was helpful. I hope that you found those questions challenging. And if you want to read more, then there's plenty more to read in Romans 13 about Paul's ideas. We'll have more of them next week.
So here are my takeaways. Number one, I think we should obey the authorities. But they are there for good, to help us. But number two, that should be as much as we are able to do in good conscience. And when it's time to speak out, then it's right to speak out. And number three, we shouldn't just complain. We should stand for election and change the world. Democracy doesn't guarantee that you have brilliant candidates. It just means if you think you can do better, then you can stand. And Christians have worked to change the world through the system over the years. So I think of people like William Wilberforce. When Paul was writing, he was writing in a context where he thought the end of the world was any minute. So obeying the authorities was the right thing to do because there wasn't time to change anything. We don't know when the end of the world is going to come. It may be tomorrow, it may be next year, or it may be in the distance. But whenever it is, we probably have time now in order to be able to change the world and do things that are right for today. So let's do that, and let's make a difference now, knowing that when God comes, all shall be put right. Well, that's all we got time for this week. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again another time. But for now, I'll let the person in charge say the final prayer.